Okay.
And this is just like being at Rob's, except it's just you and me. Just you and me. You look great.
Okay.
If you want our squares to be the identical size, you can turn your phone the other way, but you don't have to.
Okay. That might work a bit better.
There
we go.
There you go.
There we
Now
go.
we're even.
Yeah. So one of the best things I bought was a little stand here. So move back
Those
a
are
little.
fabulous to have. Okay, well, Facebook, sometimes you come on while we're doing it. It's not really live, so I don't see your questions till much later. But kick back, whether you're watching this the moment it happens or you're watching it later. Fabulous, kick back, enjoy the show. This is Comic Spot interview number 909. Our esteemed guest today is Tracey B. Simon, a Long Island comedian. Before I do her introduction, I got to give a nod to my two sponsors. One is theveteransofcomedy.com. That's where you can go online, and if you want to have someone who served our country serve up jokes live or on Zoom anywhere in the country for any group, hit them up, veteransofcomedy.com. And my other sponsor is an artist of types. He dabbles in creating art out of your art. So many times you'll see some really artsy photos of me that you know I couldn't have done myself. And that's because of my second sponsor, Steve Solomon, Solomon, 3 O's. And you can hit him up as one of my friends and have him do the same thing to your photos. I'll post some of those photos later tonight so you'll know what I'm talking about. But his work is amazing. So welcome, kick back, enjoy getting to know another comedian. The whole purpose of Comic Spot is so that you at home can get to know comics behind their mask, when they take their mask off, not the pandemic mask, when they're themselves and they're not like trying to put on a show. They're just asking, we're talking like we met at a coffee shop and we're like, you're a comic, I'm a comic. Well, let me know about this. I want to know about. I'm a question asker. My mother always said, you can ask more damn questions than 3 wise men can answer. So I don't remember the wise men answering questions, but whatever. So here we are. And today I'm going to read you the intro that Tracey B. Simon, the lovely lady in another square over there, she sent to me. And I quote, from the first time her mother asked, "You think you're funny, don't you?" Tracey Simon knew she was destined in work in comedy. Since she retired right before everything shut down in 2020, she does have good timing. She's been making people laugh at comedy clubs and other venues on Long Island, New York, and New Jersey. She'll be performing this month at the Greenhouse Cafe in Brooklyn on April 24th. So if you're in the area of Brooklyn or New York City, get on down to the Greenhouse Cafe April 24th. And at the Giggle Room at Governor's Comedy Club in Levittown, New York on May 7th. So she's going places, you guys. And I've never gotten to one-on-one talk with her live before. So you're going to witness us actually getting to know each other. This is going to be great. So welcome to the stage at Comic Spot, interview 909. Sorry, Tracey, you weren't my first. Tracey Simon. Tracey, hi. Thank you so much for taking time for this.
Okay.
Tell us so you're in Long Island. Tell us about living in Long Island right now.
Okay. Well, before I describe that, I have to make one correction. It's my fault. I'm going to be in Brooklyn on April 29th. I can't read my own handwriting, so it look like it's 4 as a 9. But living on Long Island, I came here kicking and screaming because I was raised in Queens, born in Brooklyn, mighty, mighty Brooklyn. But my husband grew up here, and it wasn't intentional that we came back, but it just kind of worked out that way. So We're in
How
his,
long have you lived in Long Island then?
oh my, it's going, this December will be 41 years.
Whoa.
Whoa, is right.
How long have you been married?
42 years.
He took you right on out of town up there, didn't he?
Yeah. You know, we were living in Queens our first year, and because he grew up in a house, he's not accustomed to apartment dwelling like I was. So he needed green grass and car, you know, highways and other things and malls. So we came
Absolutely.
here.
Wow. Well, that's something else. So now let's see, you're living there and you made it through this crazy 2 years of pandemic life. And you've been kind of sort of very close to the hub of all the pandemic. So how did COVID and all its various strains affect you and your loved ones?
Well, it was a little scary at first because nobody knew what was going on and what happened. And it was just very, like I said, strange timing that my last day of work was February 28th, 2020. And we wanted to travel, we wanted to do things. And my husband was ready to book a cruise. And I said, our passports aren't up to date, you know. And so I said, we can't go. It's a good thing we didn't book anything because we wouldn't have been able to go anywhere. And it was an interesting baptism under fire to retirement, because, you know, I've heard stories where you're kind of under each other's feet all day. Well, we were under each other's feet all day. And we were wondering, you know, what do we do? We walked the dog an awful lot because that was, you know, one of the things you could do. And, you know, figuring out how to go shopping. When we would go to Trader Joe's here at the supermarket, we'd have to wait online. It was like a, you know, a bread line, or you know, Soviet Union. We you know, we were waiting for toilet paper. You know, and you had to, they timed you, you know, 15 minutes, you know, supermarket sweep. There was a lot to get used to. And I mean, winter wasn't too bad, but once it started getting to be summer and you wanted to be out, again, the dog went to a lot of parks because that's all we could do. But, you know, things were coming in waves. You know, things would open up and then close and open up and then close. And I was wondering what I was going to do with myself. You know, because like I said, we hope to travel and go places and things. So I was sort of, how can I say, you know, pacing, trying to figure out, you know, I picked up my crocheting again and, you know, little old lady things. And then I had taken comedy courses back in the early aughts. And I had left it for a while because my work had changed and I didn't have a regular schedule. So well, I figured, you know, once I retired, I'd like to get back into it. So I looked for all my old jokes, and I knew a gentleman named Mark Breyer, who runs the show Laughs at the Library, the longest running comedy show on Long Island. So I said, Mark, can I hop on one day? And he says, sure, you know, it's sort of show up, go up kind of thing. And someone there, Helene Witt, saw me, and she invited me to join Joke Zoom. And the rest is kind of history, you know. So
Absolutely.
I found my tribe.
Yes, and like Mark Breyer's Laughs at the Library used to be on Zoom, and now it's live. And I've missed being able to hop on it on Zoom, but that's still going at the library, right?
Oh yeah, I've been doing it almost every month. It started out sort of almost well, it was on Zoom and then it went hybrid, you know, half and half. And most recently, you know, it's live. We had, I think, over 40 people or better, you know, in the audience.
Wonderful.
Probably just as many comics.
So you mentioned Joke Zoom, which is something that Rob Cioffi, Cioffi, he has a website called Joke Zoom, everybody. And you can go on there and register and go through all the steps to become vetted, to partake in a lot of things that he has going. It's so complicated. He does so many things for comics. You just got to go and navigate the website and sort out what all he does and what you want to be a part of. It's fabulous.
It is. It's a great place to work with other people on your jokes. I've met people from all over the country, some people from other parts of the world, because depending on the hour in which you do, the writing, I now have friends in Kansas. I have friends in California. There's a young lady I speak to in Japan. So,
my goodness, who
and
would
that wouldn't
ever
have
think
happened.
that? Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. You took the words out of my mouth. Go ahead and talk about what all you did during the pandemic with comedy on Zoom. I think that'd be interesting for people to hear.
Okay. Well, I started writing again, and sharing my jokes. And then for the fun of it, Rob did a challenge, 90 shows in 90 days. And you had to do at least one Zoom mic every day. So there on Facebook, there were a group, I think it's called Displaced Comics, where the moderator had a list of all the various Zoom mics. So you look, you match it up, you try to hop on, you register. And I did about 70 out of that. Yeah. So it was quite quite a feat, and do the same 5 minutes, and then some of them were 8 minutes, and so it's a matter of keeping everything straight and keeping records. I've been on this show, that show, this, and there were some that were fairly regular, like Heather Lehrman's SOS on Sundays. That was pretty much a guaranteed one. All sorts of places. Flappers had one. I think something called F Comedy. I forgot. I think it's one of the, I don't know if it's West Side Comedy Club or one of the other comedy clubs has it. So that's another thing. You get to perform, quote unquote, at a comedy club, if you want to, call it that. Yes. And yeah, and that also was a boon in many ways. Like, people complain about Zoom, but if I wanted to go into the city and do, let's say, 5 shows in a day, I'd be running all over the place and hopefully jumping from place to place and being up until 2 a.m. and then having to take the train back. But with Zoom, it was conceivable that you could do a show almost every hour if you wanted to, into the wee hours of the morning, and you didn't have to leave your living room. So it was COVID safe.
Absolutely. And another thing that I find interesting is many comedians poo-poo Zoom and think that, oh no, I need feedback. I can't just work in front of a camera. And yet you've gone and done so much on Zoom, like 70 shows in 70 days or whatever. You did X number of shows in X number of days. And I believe that Zoom can help you grow as a comedian in different ways than on stage. And in some ways, it gives you so much confidence to go back to stage. Mm-hmm. So how much more confidence did you have after all your Zoom practice?
Quite a good deal of confidence, because you get to practice your sets. And then, so it's a matter of, committing them to memory, etc. So then when you're out on stage, the only thing awkward is that you've got to learn to use your body, which, I joke, I said, I'm the perfect comedian for Zoom, because from here up, I'm Elaine May. From there down, I'm Ralphie May. And it's just the idea of, okay, you're used to being in one place in front of your screen, and here you have an entire stage. Okay, sometimes the stages are no bigger than the laptop anyway. And holding the mic. I stole my daughter's karaoke mic from her karaoke set, which she hadn't used in years, had MTV on it. And I would practice with that. And so I get used to holding the mic again. And find a brick wall background. You try to make it seem as as real as possible, for
Yeah.
yourself. And you kind of get used to not hearing tremendous laughter, but if people have their mics open and you're with a group, you hear appreciative guffaws. The only thing that was disturbing was the nanosecond of a delay. So it kind of throws your timing off a bit.
Yeah,
But like I said, it's a tool to use,
it is.
which we didn't have before.
It's relatively new and we're all getting used to it. And I think that the comedians who did partake in Zoom came out ahead of where they were at, as opposed to staying at the same level as the comedians that didn't use Zoom.
Right. And there was a lot of opportunities, to work on your material. I mean, in addition to Joke Zoom, there were some others out there. Unfortunately, there was one whose name just went out of my head, that you can see on Facebook. If you go through it, like either through Displaced Comedians and other, like your more local ones, you'll see listings for them. Like occasionally they'll say, hey, new class opening, or, join us. But like I said, Joke Zoom is free. The other ones, maybe some are, maybe some aren't, etc. Yeah. And recently I took one of Rob's live classes. I was doing some MC work. And of course your graduation is an actual performance. I mean, I did one at Governor's years ago when I took the class there to get over my fear of public speaking. But this was at a restaurant.
Wow.
And people are eating and there's waiters walking back and forth. It was in vitro, whatever they call it, in vivo. That was it, the in vivo experience. That you didn't have at Zoom unless your family members are walking back and forth. My dog is sticking her head up, begging, all the distractions. So it was, it was very close to what we had missed, all this time.
Exactly. Well, let's go back in time now that we know who you are and where you're at and what you did during the pandemic. Let's go back in time to little Tracey growing up in your house with your parents, siblings, neighbors, and in school. Paint us a picture who you were as a little child. I find that fascinating.
Okay, there's two words that kind of sum it up. Middle child.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, good. So you get it. I mean, my brother could beat up on me, but I couldn't beat up on my little sister because I was older and I should know better, except I always got the short end of the stick, in terms of that.
Except when you were getting whipped.
Oh, you knew about my dad's cat of nine tails. That's okay. He did it once to scare us kids. My mother's family, her New England relatives had worked in I guess they made purses and things like that. So when we went to visit, we'd come home with a box of scraps, leather scraps. So I was making Barbie leather vests, and stuff. And my father went through the box and he picked up this long sheet. And he goes, this one's mine. And my brother and I are watching him and he's cutting it and says, like, what is that? And he says, a cat of nine tails. And it was like, he says, you kids step out of line. I'm going to use this. So we're used to the other methods of getting, spanked or whatever. But this was particularly scary. My brother looked it up in his encyclopedia, what it was. He says, it's a torture device and whatever. So we knew where he put it. So we kids being clever, we took it out and we took a razor blade and cut off the tails and we put it back, making it look like it was whole. And the first time my father, threatened to use it on us, he goes, okay, I'm getting this thing. I don't think he was serious, but when he went to pick it up, all the tails fell off. So we were like, we were sneaky kids, even when my mom would occasionally pick up cigarettes and we didn't want her to smoke because my dad was constantly smoking, but we didn't want her to be a smoker. So my sister had long hair So we take some of her hairs and we thread it through the cigarette. So every time my mom would light it, it would smell terrible. Or we cut off all the tips of it and we stuffed the box with cotton and we put the tips back. And she would offer cigarettes to people and they'd be pulling out one filter after another. Yeah, like I said, we were sneaky kids.
How funny. You're very creative.
Yeah, and we would torture each other in different ways. My brother would throw a chenille bedspread over me, and he's telling me, he says, "You're going to suffocate under there." We were typical, sadistic little kids. But I didn't realize you could breathe through chenille. There's like you could see through it, you can breathe through it, but I can't even believe. Or my favorite was my dog had a rubber fish. Somebody bought her a fish it's a dog, not a cat. So we had so much fun with that thing. We'd get it wet and put it in the freezer. And we used to stick it under my brother's pillow at night. And once when he was starting a job, we were already older, we threw it into his briefcase. So, we had a sense of humor about things.
You came from a good upbringing where humor was a way of life. You made it part and parcel of everything you enjoyed. And then in school, were you quiet, studious?
Oh, yeah. I was the quiet one, the studious one. My sister was the flashy one, and my brother, was a boy. He just did his thing, played with his friends, played ball. But I was the quiet one. I was the studious one. The good kid. So it came, I guess, to a surprise to a lot of people that I would actually get up on stage and do things like this.
What caused you to go up on stage, Tracey?
I was always interested in comedy because that was one thing my parents really shared. Like on the Ed Sullivan Show, the comic is coming on, and so I thought, okay, it makes people happy, it makes them happy. And in the 80s, I took a course, and it was given in a woman's living room. I don't know if she's with us anymore. Her name is Lisa Carmel, and up on the Upper West Side, and there would be like 5 of us and 5 or 6 of us, and we would learn various things, like whether it's improv or other techniques. But then I found out I was going to have a baby, and that kind of put the kibosh on it for a little while. And then, changing jobs, changing careers, I kind of shelved it for a bit. But then I wanted to get over my discomfort with public speaking, because in my new career, I would have to go up and make presentations, to a board or something like that. And I said, I don't know the first thing about this. I could talk to you on a phone, etc. But to get up in front of people and talk to them and tell them something. So I could have gone to Toastmasters, probably could have gone to Dale Carnegie, but the idea of doing stand-up comedy was more appealing, in that you could have fun with it. You get immediate response. If they laugh, cry, go throw tomatoes at you or whatever. And you can make a fool of yourself in front of people. And if you could do that and survive, then, you can make a presentation to people. And, is learning how to structure, what you're saying. Some people can do one-liner, and they're fabulous. But sometimes you have to, make things flow a little better, like a story, how to tell your story. And, and otherwise, if you're this and you don't move your hands and you're boring, and so you've learned to make your gestures and act out, but not too much, so it gave me a certain level of comfort to do that. And I was starting to do some open mics. And then I changed jobs and my hours changed and they were not predictable. So it was very hard to do that. So it was still in the back of my mind. Occasionally I would write something, try to keep a notebook of jokes. And then, like I said, when the pandemic happened, I thought about doing it in retirement, but the pandemic kind of brought it on sooner.
Wow. So you spoke about children, and I'm curious how many children, and you spoke about different jobs, and I'd love to know what different jobs you've had.
Okay. Well, let's see. With children, I have a daughter, who's getting married, yay, in September, and in Texas. And we're very excited about that. I found a dress, so that's
What color is your dress?
It's a sort of a French navy with some floral embroidery on the front.
Gosh, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah, no, I liked it. There was another one I liked too that was a little more fairy princess, but
Oh my gosh.
you only have one body, so you only get to wear one dress. And she was a good kid, and she was a teacher, and now she teaches teachers. So very meta, very meta. And as for me, I was supposed to be a teacher, back in, the 70s, you were either a teacher, a nurse, etc. And we were just coming into that, I wouldn't say feminist, but the idea that women can be more of that. So I had no real clue of what I wanted to do. And I really wasn't made for the classroom. They just sort of wanted babysitters, I felt then. So I didn't know what to do with myself. Here I had this degree in English and communications, etc. And as luck would have it, I wound up in an engineering firm in their PR department. So I learned somewhat about PR, and then I moved into advertising a bit, and working on, I was all sorts of things. I did a little bit of copywriting. I was traffic manager. I wore so many hats. And occasionally I'd go to school to, like to the School of Visual Arts, or the new school, I think it's Parsons New School, and take NYU wants to take a course in how to write press releases, etc. And eventually I wound up working for one of the largest entertainment PR firms in the country.
Wow. What did you do for them?
I started out as a administrative assistant, rather than secretary. We didn't like that term. And it was a great place for a woman to work. It was almost all female, but I was privy to the owner's point of view, and that women were cheaper to use. But actually, women talk faster, so we could pitch a story so much faster than a man can. So that was a good place to be. And I worked partly in the strictly entertainment, then they moved me over to corporate entertainment. So it was more the movie companies and things like that, and products and what have you. And then I went on to do lifestyle PR.
What's that?
Those are the cool things like champagne and jewelry and what have you. I got the more serious things because I was older. So so while the younger ones are running around with Coach bag and stuff, I had the more serious stuff like the finer wines, and I also did work for the Spelman Center for the Treatment of AIDS. And that was pretty, serious, and they figured I would have the maturity to do that, which is a nice way of saying you're old. But that was quite interesting. I got to meet Phil Donahue when he was doing a shoot there, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, when I look back on it, I said, I did that. I was, I got to work the Tony Awards one year.
What?
Yeah, I was handing out bottles of champagne for our sponsor to the winners. And I got to, I wasn't in the theater, because everything was outside. And one of the people from CBS I made friends with gave me a tape of it. but I got to go to the after party, which was huge. So
Who
that was a real
impressed
fun
you the
night.
most?
I'm sorry, what?
Who impressed you the most that particular night?
Oh, everybody was just so impressive. But the funniest story is my husband came with me. You know, they paid his way or whatever, so I would have a little help with me. And he was talking to this gentleman part of the night, just sort of making friends. And I said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And he says, "No, just this guy." I said, "Just this guy is Rupert Holmes, who's up for the Mystery of Edwin Drood, the musical, writing it, etc." I said, "Just this guy." And first he thought he was going to be bored. My husband said, "I'm going to be bored." I said, "Well, Jack Lemmon just walked behind you." What?
Oh my gosh.
And his favorite moment was towards the end. We had to give the winners, the best actor, actresses, stuff, a bottle of champagne. And it was that year was Lily Tomlin, Bernadette Peters. I think it was it not George Rose? It was somebody else, I think, from Edwin Drood, or it could have been, I can't remember the guy's name, and Judd Hirsch. So we were giving out the champagne. Lily Tomlin didn't want hers, and I understood. But my husband got to give it to Bernadette Peters, and he told me, "I looked down her dress." She was shorter, And I said, "Oh, that was a great capper for the evening." But
I love Bernadette Peters and Lily Tomlin. Oh my goodness.
It was great, and I mean, he wasn't being salacious. He was just like accidentally, like a little boy, just finding his dad's magazines, so that was his highlight. And then we went to the after party, and a friend of mine, may she rest in peace, her cousin was Ron Silver. And she said, "If you happen to see him, go up and tell him that I said hello." And I was like kind of awkward about it. And I said, "Well, I can do this." So I said, I saw him and I said, "Mr. Silver, Marianne says hello." He goes, "How do you know her?"
Oh.
I said, "We're in theater group together." "Oh, okay." And he says, "I'll tell her I hug her back." And, it was very nice. And just like us, in many ways.
Are.
Yeah. And a lot are, I believe I learned from PR, some people are very down to earth, and then there's some others that really aren't. But I mean, I've got Tony Danza stories and stuff like that.
Oh, I want
Tony's
to
a
hear
good
a
guy.
Tony. Tell me a Tony Danza story. I'm a huge fan.
This is maybe a little bit of apocrypha, but his publicist, I did some work for his publicist, and they were doing something called Night of a Thousand Stars, I think, way back, and it was in the 80s. And one of the gentlemen who ran the company, and I'm not going to make fun of his speech because he had a lisp, very Elmer Fudd-ish lisp. And the gentleman, they're leaving the event, and this fellow, I'll call him Warren, taps on the shoulder of a young man in a tuxedo, and he says, "Young man, my name is, and this is Danny Kaye. He's a big client of ours, and I want you to get us a limousine." And the guy in the tuxedo turns around and goes, "Hi, Mr. So-and-so. My name's Tony Danza. I pay your company $5,000 a month," or whatever it was, so people would know my name. And he didn't even know who his own clients were. But he was nice about it, but he was just so relaxed and so down to earth. Like, if we couldn't find him, we know he was at his mom's house in Long Island. So, but like I said, the story is a little bit of apocrypha, whether it happened exactly like that, but I could see it happening.
Absolutely. I got to go and watch Regis and I think it was Regis and Kelly.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And we were getting a tour of the building, and we were walking down one of the aisles getting a tour, and Tony Danza was coming down pushing his own cart. He was moving his office from one place to another, moving his own stuff. And he
That was
stopped and
him.
said,
He was the real deal, very down to earth, you know, just an overall, you know, nice guy. Like I said, he wasn't, you know, angry or rude. He was just very matter of fact about things. But he was one of my favorites, you know, when he came in. And I remember once I was on the phone with the LA office, and I was talking to the chairman's secretary, and all of a sudden she hears me gasp. And she says, David Hasselhoff just walked in, right? Tall, isn't he? And I said, you knew.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, you know, and he was taller than I thought he would be.
Wow.
So that was kind of the fun of it. We weren't allowed, of course, you know, to bother anybody, you know, etc. But it was just such a cool thing, you know, like I gave Stockard Channing my bathroom key, you know.
Oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah,
Wow,
so that was a
how
lot of fun. And then, you know, when I changed careers, what happened was I was home with my daughter for a while, because in the last company I worked for, they upset the whole apple cart. It was new people and, you know, new broom sweep clean, and I didn't like the broom. So I said, well, you know, I'm having a baby. So my husband said, look, you know, you could stay home for a while, you know. So well, long story short, you know, because a lot of rigmarole happened, but I took a job that was only supposed to last a year with Queensborough Public Library in their PR department. And, you know, it's just filling in, you know, for somebody, and they gave us some health insurance, you know, etc. And my husband was home with my daughter. And I said, you know, I thought about being a librarian years ago. I didn't want to be a teacher, but library school appealed to me. My parents were dead set against it. They had their reasons. So I went back to school and I became a librarian.
Wow.
And yeah, so I did a reference, and also I couldn't get out of showbiz. So I was doing programming. So I would hire all the entertainment for the libraries. And I did that for 27 years or so.
Wow.
And I said, you know, like my husband says, you retire when you have enough, and you had enough. So it got
What kind of work has your husband done in the world? Did you already tell me?
No, when I met him, he was a journalist for trade publications. When I met him, he was working for one for insurance, well, business insurance. That was the name of the publication. And then he was working on something in the cable trade. You know, he was the editor of a cable publication for years. And then he went, as we jokingly called it, the dark side. He decided to get into public relations. So he, you know, did things for financial companies, etc. And his last position was at City College.
Wow.
So we both, but to put it one way, we were going to England for our 5th anniversary, my first big trip, you know, with a passport, you know. And the fellow looking at the passport sees that I'm working in PR. My husband is working in in journalism. And he says, oh, you work both sides of the fence, don't you?
Wow.
Said, yes, we do. And that reminded me of a story when I got my first hit. My first story in a publication is in PR. It was in Playboy. It was funny. And they said you had to market it to your boss. So I had to write a memo, you know, dear Mr., you know, so and so. I just got my first hit, you know, for this bathing suit and Playboy. And oh no, it was the cable. I'm sorry, there was something in cable that I had to call my husband. I said, you're covering cable, you know, so could you please talk to the chairman's friend and do something on him? So he says, okay, you know, I'll do something. When the story appeared, I marketed to the boss, and I wrote, I hope you realize I had to sleep with the editor to get this story. And he wrote back, that's my girl. of course, now that would not slide, you know.
That would be more HR than PR.
Oh yeah, you know, you can't, not that you can't do that anymore. It depends on who you're doing it for and with, because
Yeah.
looking back on things that I did, it's like, nowadays that would be considered, harassment or, or what have you. But like I said, it depends on who's saying it and in what context.
Exactly.
Certain things are just totally inappropriate, but certain things like then we just took it and just let it slide.
Exactly. That's so
Yeah.
true. Well, Helene Witt has spoken so nicely of you. One of the things that she prepared me for is that your comedy is very smart comedy. So I'd like to delve into a little bit as we get near wrapping up our interview time. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the evolution of your comedy in a smart comedic way. So
Okay.
like how to encourage people to try to be smarter with their comedy, or what made you go down that path? Was that a choice, or is that just how it happened? Or can you talk a little about your personal style?
Well, I'm used to writing things in, essays and long form pieces. So as far as writing, quick one-liners, which I can, do, but it's finding the humor it's sort of observational. It's definitely true to life. It's not making up things from whole cloth. It's taking, what actually happened. And matter of fact, one of the jokes that I do actually did happen with my daughter. I was visiting her and she made breakfast for us, but she was out of coffee. So we went to the local coffee shop and we get to the register and she says, pay the guy. And I was like, excuse me? I said, you're working, you make your own money. Why don't you pay? And she says, may I remind you that this morning I made you eggs. And I looked at her and I said, and 30 years ago, my eggs made you. She paid.
That's
So,
funny.
and that actually happened. She may deny it, but and right now I've written some stuff based on, being retired and living with somebody, like I said, being under each other's feet and, being able to mold something, like that. Because there's a lot of easy ways to do comedy. Like a lot of, a lot of younger guys, do their jokes about their genitalia. And a lot of young women now feel they have to follow suit. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you're trying to appeal to a larger crowd, you've got to find other relatable things. And I think that's where we're coming from with, smarter comedy. I'm never going to be Seinfeld,
Yeah.
He's kind of in a class by himself, and everybody has a style. And mine is, telling stories based on the truth. And the hardest part, though, is trying to distill the story down to its essence, because we're not storytelling here. We are telling jokes, and you have to, get it going. And if you can extend the joke and have, it could be the same story and just pop other jokes in. So I think that might be what, Helene's talking about.
I think it is. That explains it. So
Yeah.
what is a high point in your 2.5 years of comedy? Is that about right? In this new venture, you went and learned about it and took classes a long time ago in early 2000s. But for now, since the pandemic, you've been coming back into it. What are some highs and low, not so high moments that you've had?
Well, let's see. The high moment was actually getting paid to do it. And, I'm not talking $5, I mean, it was like, wow, for at least for a beginner, comic. And the low point, well, it's knowing that like my problem initially was the phenomenon of the bringer show,
Yes.
and not putting them down. It's not their fault, but I
No.
started comedy at a certain age where all my friends and family are either in Florida, dead, or would rather have root canal than to go to a comedy show. So that was a little hard, to do that. So it's, it's kind of makes me feel sad, that I can't be on the show because of, XYZ. But even some low points can turn into positives. Me and a bunch of fellows back in the early aughts, we were hired to work in a bar. And nobody was listening to us. We didn't care. So then you could say whatever you want and do whatever you want. And there's this one woman at the bar who was like enthralled with us, and we had the most receptive, wonderful audience. So we thought this was going to be a bummer, but it turned out everything for you, Marlene,
I love those bar shows where you have to work so hard to get them to turn their bar stool around. It's like being on The Voice, but for comedy.
Oh yeah. I mean, I could tell you about open mics in a bar where some of the acts were like, I have to go on after that.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. But I don't think we have time for that one.
You can, and we'll use that as our last story before we segue off.
Okay. Well, one of the first open mics I did was in a bar in East Meadow. I think it was called Callahan's. And the fellow who went on before me, he went up to the mic, and he was carrying, a couple of shopping bags, like he just came from the supermarket. And before he starts, he's handing out to the guys at the bar some eggs and tomatoes. And I'm like, okay. So he gets up, he starts his act, and it's like one of the worst in the world. And he stops and he looks at the guys. He goes, well, aren't you going to use those things? And the guys are like, what? He says, you want us to throw this at you? He says, yeah, my act stinks. Go ahead, throw it. And they didn't want to take the bait. So the guy took an egg himself. He says, let me show you how it's done. And he hits himself with the tomato, with the egg. He brought a paper towel at least with him. And I had to go on after him. And I took the mic, and it was covered with egg.
Oh.
And it was like, okay, this is what I chose to do.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, okay, that was an experience.
Oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah.
That would have been horrible, horrible.
I know. And it's like, it's just, we had to clean up the floor after he left.
Oh man.
Yeah. Thank goodness he didn't stick around.
So remind everybody where you're going to be performing. And then when you're done with where you're performing, let everybody know where to follow you, please, Tracey.
Okay. Coming up, like I said at the beginning, on Saturday, April 29th, I'll be at the Greenhouse Cafe in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. It includes dinner. So, and, so you make your reservations. I post the flyers. And on May 7th, I'll be at Governor's in the newly dubbed Giggle Room. It used to be the little room, but now it's bigger. And with headliner Chris Murphy. So yay. So please buy your tickets now. Tell them you're coming to see me. And in June, I'll be at Club G in West Hempstead. And I'll pick up other things, in between.
Lovely. I
yes.
love the Greenhouse Cafe in Bayside. Didn't you say Bay Ridge?
Bay Ridge.
Yeah. I sold advertising when I lived in New York in the 90s for the Brooklyn papers. And Bay Ridge is where our office was. So I know that Greenhouse Cafe is beautiful. I love
Yeah,
it.
so I'm very excited about that one. And who knows, I mean, in the meantime, I'll be hitting the mics and maybe doing an occasional show. Like I did one at Coasters last Friday, and that was very nice. Shout out to Kristen Tinsley, the producer. And let's see what else. And as far as, people, being influential, of course, Rob Chaffee and Alan Streisfeld and Mike Dillon,
Yeah.
all really smart and cool people. And I'm not buttering them up. It's true. These guys are really great, good to know. And pretty much, the people I've met, we all, it's a family, it's a tribe, it's a family, call it whatever you want. But, when you find a group of people who get you, it's wonderful.
It is. Boy, there's nothing like it.
Mhm.
And then where to follow you on Facebook, Instagram, that kind of
Okay.
thing.
Well, I made it easy. It's the same for both. And I have to remember to put more stuff on it. But it's Tracey B. Simon Comedy on Facebook and also on Instagram. So I made that easy.
Wonderful. And the Tracey has an E in it. EY.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. TRACEYB Simon. And it was funny. I once was walking through Greenwich Village and there was a young lady wearing a t-shirt and it said Tracey on it, but the E was twice the size of the rest of the letters. And I said, I want that shirt.
I love that. Well, you've been a delight to get to know. And you guys, thanks for watching interview 909, not to brag. And I'm so glad that you were able to get to know Tracey B. Simon today. And so share this with other people who, don't know who to go and support in comedy. She's out in the Long Island area, but she does, like she said, Brooklyn, Bay Ridge coming up, and probably she'll travel anywhere if you make it worth her while. So if you're a booker, club owner.
I went to Poughkeepsie. I went as far as Poughkeepsie. So.
My gosh, that's a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
So just support her comedy. You've seen she's been a doll to get to know. She's the real deal. She tells jokes that really happen. So she's not fluffernutter. She's the real deal. We'll call her the real deal. Tracey, the real deal, B. Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'll post this, and it's the 29th that you'll be in Brooklyn, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll make that correction. Anything else you want to send me to? As when I've interviewed you, you can send me anything you want for me to share, or when I see you sharing things where you're at, I will reshare them if I miss it and they're important. Tell me.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.